Question 1. The assessment process reveals that a learner driver in Gisborne, New Zealand, has expressed significant eagerness to take their practical driving test, believing they are ready after a few lessons. However, the instructor observes that while the learner understands basic road rules, their hazard perception and ability to anticipate the actions of other road users in varied Gisborne traffic conditions are still developing. Considering the land transport driver licensing, Rule 2017, which approach best reflects the instructor's professional and ethical obligations. Option A. Recommend the learner for their practical driving test immediately due to their expressed eagerness, assuming their confidence indicates sufficient readiness. Option B. Postpone the practical driving test indefinitely until the learner exhibits absolute perfection in all aspects of driving. Regardless of their progress, Option C. Pass the learner for their practical driving test despite the observed developing hazard perception, prioritizing the learner's desire to pass over strict adherence to safety standards. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive practical driving assessment, focusing on the learner's ability to demonstrate safe driving behaviors and hazard anticipation in realistic Gisborne driving scenarios, and only proceed to recommend for testing if all competency standards are met. Correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive practical driving assessment, focusing on the learner's ability to demonstrate safe driving behaviors and hazard anticipation in realistic Gisborne driving scenarios, and only proceed to recommend for testing if all competency standards are met. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driving instructor in Gisborne, New Zealand. Due to the potential conflict between a learner driver's perceived readiness and the instructor's professional obligation to ensure road safety and adherence to the land transport driver licensing, Rule 2017. The instructor must balance the learner's eagerness with the critical need for competence, avoiding undue pressure or premature assessment. The challenge lies in making an objective judgment that prioritizes public safety and regulatory compliance over personal or learner-driven timelines. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, objective assessment of the learner's skills against the requirements of the land transport driver licensing, Rule 2017, specifically focusing on their ability to demonstrate safe driving behaviors in various conditions relevant to the Gisborne area. This includes assessing their understanding and application of road rules, hazard perception, vehicle control, and defensive driving techniques. The instructor must ensure the learner can independently and safely operate a vehicle without posing a risk to themselves or others, as mandated by the rule's intent to ensure licensed drivers are competent. This approach aligns with the ethical duty of care instructors owe to their students and the public. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the assessment solely based on the learner's expressed desire to pass quickly, without a comprehensive evaluation of their actual driving competence. This fails to uphold the instructor's responsibility under the land transport driver licensing, Rule 2017, to ensure drivers are safe and capable, potentially leading to the licensing of an unprepared individual. Another incorrect approach is to postpone the assessment indefinitely due to minor, correctable errors, without providing constructive feedback or a clear path for improvement. This can be demotivating for the learner and does not serve the purpose of the licensing process, which is to guide learners towards safe driving proficiency. A further incorrect approach is to pass the learner despite clear evidence of significant deficiencies in their driving skills, perhaps due to a desire to maintain a high pass rate or avoid confrontation. This directly contravenes the spirit and letter of the land transport driver licensing, Rule 2017, which prioritizes safety and competence above all else and constitutes a serious ethical breach. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective assessment and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Understanding the specific requirements of the land transport driver licensing, Rule 2017, and the practical skills needed for safe driving in Gisborne. 2. Conducting a systematic and objective evaluation of the learner's performance against these standards. 3. Providing clear, constructive feedback to the learner, outlining areas for improvement and setting realistic expectations. 4. Making a decision based on the learner's demonstrated competence, not on external pressures or personal convenience. 5. Documenting the assessment process and the rationale for the decision. Question 2. The evaluation methodology shows that a Gisborne driving instructor is preparing a candidate for their practical driving test in New Zealand. Considering the requirements of the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, which of the following approaches best reflects the instructor's responsibility in ensuring the candidate is adequately prepared for the assessment of their driving competency? Option A. The instructor prioritizes completing the assessment quickly, focusing only on the most common driving errors, and assuming the candidate will perform adequately on less frequent situations. Option B. The instructor concentrates heavily on the theoretical aspects of the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, believing that a strong theoretical understanding will automatically translate into safe practical driving. Option C. The instructor focuses on thoroughly practicing all aspects of the Gisborne driving test syllabus, including navigating local road conditions, hazard identification, and adherence to all traffic laws, ensuring the candidate can demonstrate safe and competent driving in various scenarios. Option D. The instructor allows personal judgment to heavily influence the assessment, focusing on aspects they personally deem important, rather than strictly adhering to the official NZTA assessment criteria. Correct answer is C. The instructor focuses on thoroughly practicing all aspects of the Gisborne driving test syllabus, including navigating local road conditions, hazard identification, and adherence to all traffic laws, ensuring the candidate can demonstrate safe and competent driving in various scenarios. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that assessing driver competency in Gisborne, New Zealand, requires a nuanced understanding of road rules, hazard perception, and vehicle control specific to the local environment. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves balancing the need for thorough assessment with the practical constraints of a driving test, ensuring fairness to all candidates while upholding public safety standards mandated by the New Zealand Transport Agency, NZTA Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017. The best approach involves a comprehensive observation of the candidate's ability to navigate typical Gisborne road conditions, including rural roads, urban intersections, and potentially unsealed surfaces, while demonstrating adherence to all traffic laws and safe driving practices. This includes assessing their understanding of speed limits, right-of-way rules, and their ability to anticipate and react to hazards such as pedestrians, cyclists, and other vehicles. The assessor must also evaluate the candidate's vehicle handling skills, including steering, braking, and gear selection, in a manner that is safe and efficient. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the NZTA objective of licensing drivers who are competent and safe, as outlined in the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, which emphasizes practical demonstration of safe driving. An approach that prioritizes speed of assessment over thoroughness would be professionally unacceptable. This failure would stem from a disregard for the NZTA mandate to ensure a high standard of driver competency, potentially leading to the licensing of unsafe drivers, overlooking critical elements like hazard perception or adherence to specific Gisborne road signage, e.g., rural speed limits or farm crossing warnings, would be a direct violation of the rule's intent. Another unacceptable approach would be to focus solely on theoretical knowledge without sufficient practical application. While understanding road rules is crucial, the Gisborne driving test is designed to assess the practical application of these rules in real-world driving scenarios. Failing to observe how a candidate actually drives, their decision-making under pressure, or their vehicle control would mean the assessment does not meet the practical competency requirements of the rule. Finally, an approach that allows personal bias or subjective interpretation of driving performance, rather than objective adherence to the NZTA assessment criteria, is also professionally unsound. The rule requires consistent and fair assessment based on defined standards, not on the assessor's personal preferences or assumptions about the candidate's driving ability. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory requirements, NZTA Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017. This is followed by a systematic checklist of observable behaviors and skills to be assessed, tailored to the specific testing environment of Gisborne. Continuous professional development and adherence to assessor guidelines are crucial to ensure objective and consistent evaluation, prioritizing public safety above all else. Question 3. Considering the Gisborne driver's test regulations, How should an examiner respond when an applicant for a driving test arrives with a personal vehicle that the examiner suspects may not meet the required safety and operational standards, and the applicant expresses significant anxiety about rescheduling? Option A. Immediately refuse the test and inform the applicant they must reschedule without providing any further explanation or assistance. Option B. Allow the applicant to proceed with the test in their personal vehicle, assuming it appears functional enough for immediate use to alleviate their anxiety. Option C. Clearly explain the Gisborne driver's test regulations regarding vehicle suitability and safety, and advise the applicant on how to ensure their vehicle meets these standards for a future test. Option D. Suggest that the applicant find a mechanic who can overlook any potential issues with the vehicle to ensure it passes the examiner's inspection. The correct answer is C. Clearly explain the Gisborne driver's test regulations regarding vehicle suitability and safety, and advise the applicant on how to ensure their vehicle meets these standards for a future test. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a client with the strict regulatory requirements of the Gisborne driver's test. The examiner must act impartially and ensure the integrity of the testing process, while also being sensitive to the applicant's personal circumstances. Failure to adhere to regulations can lead to invalid test results and disciplinary action, while an overly rigid approach might be perceived as lacking empathy, potentially impacting the applicant's confidence and future attempts. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly and calmly explaining the Gisborne driver's test regulations regarding the use of personal vehicles. This approach prioritizes adherence to the established rules, ensuring fairness and consistency for all applicants. The Gisborne driver's test manual explicitly states that vehicles used for testing must meet specific safety and operational standards, and that the examiner has the final say on vehicle suitability. By explaining these requirements, the examiner upholds the integrity of the test and provides the applicant with clear, actionable information on how to proceed, which is ethically sound and legally compliant with Gisborne's road safety regulations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves allowing the applicant to use their personal vehicle without a thorough inspection, despite the examiner's reservations. This fails to uphold the Gisborne driver's test regulations concerning vehicle suitability and safety. It compromises the integrity of the test by potentially allowing an unsafe or non-compliant vehicle, which could lead to an inaccurate assessment of the applicant's driving ability and poses a risk to public safety. Another incorrect approach is to immediately refuse the test and dismiss the applicant without offering any explanation or alternative. This demonstrates a lack of professionalism and empathy. While upholding regulations is crucial, a complete dismissal without guidance is not in line with the expected professional conduct of a Gisborne testing officer, who should aim to facilitate the testing process within the established rules. A further incorrect approach is to suggest the applicant bribe a mechanic to pass the vehicle inspection. This is a severe ethical and legal violation. It promotes corruption, undermines the fairness of the testing process, and is a direct contravention of the principles of honesty and integrity expected of all Gisborne public officials. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should follow a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance, fairness, and ethical conduct. First, they must clearly understand and apply the relevant Gisborne driver's test regulations. Second, they should communicate these regulations clearly and respectfully to the applicant, explaining the reasons behind them. Third, if the applicant's proposed course of action is non-compliant, the professional should offer constructive alternatives or guidance on how to meet the requirements. Finally, they must maintain impartiality and integrity throughout the interaction, refusing any suggestion of unethical or illegal behavior. Question 4. The review process indicates that a driving instructor in Gisborne, while preparing a client for their driving test, learned that the client was also seeking advice on personal investments. The instructor happens to be a licensed financial advisor and has a financial incentive to recommend a particular investment product that they believe would be beneficial for the client. What is the most appropriate course of action for the instructor to take in this situation, adhering to professional standards and the spirit of the Gisborne driver's test preparation? Option A. Inform the client about the potential conflict of interest and recommend that the client seek independent financial advice from a qualified professional while continuing to focus solely on driving instruction. Option B. Avoid discussing financial matters altogether and pretend not to have any knowledge of financial advising, even if the client directly asks for advice. Option C. Subtly suggest the investment product that the instructor benefits from, framing it as a helpful tip based on their financial expertise, and mention that they can assist further if the client is interested. Option D. Advise the client that they can help with their investments as well, given their financial advisor license, and proceed to discuss the specific investment product they are incentivized to promote. The correct answer is A. Inform the client about the potential conflict of interest and recommend that the client seek independent financial advice from a qualified professional, while continuing to focus solely on driving instruction. Explanation. The review process indicates a potential conflict of interest and a breach of professional conduct related to the handling of a client's financial information during the Gisborne driver's test preparation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the driving instructor to balance their duty of care to the client with their personal financial interests and the ethical obligations of maintaining client confidentiality and avoiding undue influence. The instructor must navigate the delicate line between providing helpful advice and exploiting a position of trust for personal gain. The best professional approach involves prioritizing the client's best interests and adhering strictly to ethical guidelines and the principles of the Gisborne driver's test preparation process. This means the instructor should proactively disclose any potential conflicts of interest and avoid any actions that could be perceived as pressuring the client into a specific financial decision. The instructor's primary responsibility is to facilitate the client's learning and success in the test, not to leverage their relationship for personal financial benefit. This aligns with the ethical imperative to act with integrity and in the client's best interest, ensuring that all advice is objective and solely for the client's benefit. An approach that involves subtly suggesting specific investment products or services that the instructor benefits from, even if framed as helpful advice, is professionally unacceptable. This constitutes a conflict of interest and a breach of trust, as it prioritizes the instructor's financial gain over the client's welfare. Such actions can lead to a loss of client confidence and potential regulatory repercussions. Another unacceptable approach is to remain silent about the potential conflict of interest while still subtly steering the client towards the instructor's affiliated financial services. This lack of transparency is unethical and misleading, as it allows the client to believe the advice is purely objective when it is influenced by the instructor's personal gain. This undermines the client's ability to make informed decisions. Finally, an approach where the instructor directly solicits business for their financial services during a driving lesson, even if the client expresses financial concerns, is also unprofessional. While the client may have raised the topic, the driving instructor's role is to focus on driving instruction. Diverting the conversation to personal financial gain in this context exploits the client's vulnerability and blurs professional boundaries. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential conflicts of interest. They must then consider their ethical obligations and regulatory requirements, prioritizing the client's welfare above all else. Transparency, disclosure, and seeking independent advice for the client when necessary are crucial steps in maintaining professional integrity. Question 5. Performance analysis shows a Gisborne driving instructor has identified a learner driver who, despite completing all required training hours, consistently demonstrates unsafe driving habits that would likely result in failure of the Gisborne driver's test and pose a risk to road safety. The learner is eager to book their test immediately. What is the most responsible course of action for the instructor? Option A. Encourage the learner to book the test immediately, suggesting they might be able to talk their way through any minor issues with the testing officer. Option B. Avoid discussing the safety concerns with the learner and allow them to book their test, hoping they will improve spontaneously. Option C. Clearly explain to the learner that their current driving skills do not meet the required safety standards for the Gisborne driver's test and advise them to undertake further practice in specific areas before rebooking. Option D. Pass the learner for the test, assuming the testing officer will identify and fail them if the safety issues are significant enough. Correct answer is C. Clearly explain to the learner that their current driving skills do not meet the required safety standards for the Gisborne driver's test and advise them to undertake further practice in specific areas before rebooking. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Gisborne driver training instructor who has identified a potential safety risk with a learner driver. The instructor must balance the learner's desire to pass the test with the paramount responsibility of ensuring road safety for the learner and the public. This requires careful judgment to avoid compromising safety standards while still supporting the learner's progress. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the instructor clearly and directly communicating to the learner that their current driving skills do not meet the required safety standards for the Gisborne driver's test. This approach prioritizes safety and adheres to the ethical obligation of the instructor to only endorse candidates who are demonstrably competent and safe. It aligns with the fundamental purpose of driver testing, which is to ensure individuals can operate a vehicle safely on Gisborne's roads, thereby protecting all road users. This direct communication also provides the learner with specific feedback, enabling them to understand the areas needing improvement before re-attempting the test. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to pass the learner despite recognizing a significant safety concern. This action would violate the instructor's professional duty of care and the integrity of the Gisborne driver licensing system. It would put the learner and other road users at risk and undermine public trust in the licensing process. Another incorrect approach is to avoid discussing the safety concerns with the learner, hoping they will improve on their own or that the testing officer will identify the issues. This passive stance abdicates the instructor's responsibility to provide constructive feedback and guidance, which is a core component of effective driver training. It fails to proactively address a known risk. A further incorrect approach is to pressure the learner to take the test immediately, suggesting they might get lucky with the testing officer. This is unethical and unprofessional, as it prioritizes the learner's immediate desire over their actual safety and competence. It also misrepresents the purpose of the driver's test and the instructor's role. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should follow a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Objective assessment of the learner's skills against established safety standards. 2. Clear, honest, and constructive communication with the learner regarding their performance and any identified risks. 3. Adherence to all regulatory requirements and ethical guidelines governing driver instruction and testing. 4. Refusal to endorse a candidate for testing if they do not meet the required safety benchmarks, even if it leads to short-term dissatisfaction. Question 6. Compliance review shows a driver in Gisborne, New Zealand, notices their vehicle's low fuel warning light illuminate. They are approximately 15 minutes from their intended destination, which is a residential area. What is the most responsible course of action for the driver to take? Option A. Continue driving towards the destination, monitoring the fuel gauge and planning to refuel immediately upon arrival or at the earliest safe opportunity if the vehicle shows signs of sputtering. Option B. Immediately attempt to exit the main road at the next available exit, even if it requires a sudden maneuver to find a service station. Option C. Ignore the low fuel warning and continue driving as normal, assuming the vehicle has sufficient range to reach the destination. Option D. Pull over to the side of the road immediately in the current lane to assess the situation and consult a map for nearby service stations. The correct answer is A. Continue driving towards the destination, monitoring the fuel gauge and planning to refuel immediately upon arrival or at the earliest safe opportunity if the vehicle shows signs of sputtering. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the driver to balance immediate personal needs with the legal and safety obligations of operating a vehicle. The temptation to prioritize convenience over adherence to traffic laws, especially when facing a minor inconvenience like a low fuel warning, can lead to risky decisions. Careful judgment is required to assess the actual risk versus the perceived urgency. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves prioritizing safety and legal compliance above all else. This means recognizing the low fuel warning not as an immediate crisis, but as a signal to plan for refueling at the next safe and legal opportunity. This approach involves maintaining situational awareness, understanding the vehicle's fuel range, and making a conscious decision to seek a service station without compromising traffic flow or safety. This aligns with the fundamental principles of responsible driving, which emphasize predictability and adherence to road rules to ensure the safety of oneself and others. The Gisborne District Council's road rules and safe driving guidelines implicitly promote this by emphasizing defensive driving and awareness of one's surroundings and vehicle status. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves continuing to drive with the fuel light illuminated, hoping to reach a destination without stopping. This is professionally unacceptable, as it disregards the potential for the vehicle to run out of fuel unexpectedly, which could lead to a sudden stop in a dangerous location, obstructing traffic and creating a hazard for other road users. This directly contravenes the spirit of safe driving practices promoted by Gisborne authorities. Another incorrect approach is to make an abrupt lane change or sudden deceleration to exit the roadway without adequate signaling or checking mirrors. This is a direct violation of safe driving practices and traffic laws, as it endangers other drivers and can lead to collisions. The Gisborne District Council's guidelines stress the importance of predictable driving maneuvers and proper signaling. A further incorrect approach is to ignore the fuel warning entirely and continue driving, as if no issue exists, potentially pushing the vehicle beyond its safe operating range. This demonstrates a lack of responsibility and foresight, increasing the likelihood of a breakdown in an unsafe or inconvenient location, which can have broader implications for traffic management and emergency services. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, legality, and predictability. When faced with a vehicle warning, the first step is to assess the nature of the warning and its immediate implications for safety. This involves understanding the vehicle's capabilities and the surrounding traffic conditions. The next step is to consult relevant regulations and guidelines, such as those provided by the Gisborne District Council, to understand legal obligations. Finally, a decision should be made that minimizes risk to oneself and others, ensuring that any necessary action, such as refueling, is taken at the earliest safe and legal opportunity. Question 7. Investigation of a Gisborne driving instructor's ethical obligations reveals a student exhibiting a consistent, unsafe habit during practice sessions that could lead to a failed test and, more critically, pose a risk to public safety. The instructor is aware that this habit, if unaddressed, is likely to be penalized by the testing officer. Considering the instructor's duty of care and the regulatory framework governing driver licensing in New Zealand, which of the following represents the most appropriate professional response? Option A. Recommend that the student attempt to mask the unsafe habit during the test or pretend they are not doing it. Option B. Inform the student that it is the examiner's responsibility to identify and penalize such habits, and therefore it is not the instructor's primary concern to address it before the test. Option C. Advise the student that the habit is unsafe and likely to result in a failed test, offering to work on correcting it before the test, and explaining the importance of genuine competency for road safety. Option D. Suggest to the student that they should try their best during the test and hope the examiner does not notice the unsafe habit. The correct answer is C. Advise the student that the habit is unsafe and likely to result in a failed test, offering to work on correcting it before the test, and explaining the importance of genuine competency for road safety. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Gisborne driver training instructor regarding the ethical and legal implications of a student's driving behavior. The instructor must balance the student's desire to pass the test with the paramount responsibility of ensuring public safety and adhering to the Land Transport Driver Licensing Rule 1999 and the NZ Transport Agency NZTA Code of Conduct for Driving Instructors. The instructor's judgment is critical, as a lapse in professional ethics or regulatory compliance could have severe consequences, including endangering other road users, compromising the integrity of the licensing system, and facing disciplinary action. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the instructor firmly but constructively advising the student that the observed behavior is unsafe and unacceptable for a driving test in Gisborne. The instructor should explain that attempting the test with such habits would likely result in failure and, more importantly, poses a risk to themselves and others. This approach aligns with the instructor's duty of care under the Land Transport Driver Licensing Rule 1999, which mandates that instructors must ensure their students are competent and safe drivers. It also upholds the NZTA Code of Conduct, which requires instructors to act with integrity and professionalism, prioritizing safety above all else. The instructor should offer to work on correcting these specific behaviors before proceeding with the test, reinforcing the goal of achieving genuine competency. Incorrect approach is analysis, advising the student to just try their best and hope the examiner doesn't notice, is a direct contravention of the instructor's duty of care and professional integrity. This approach prioritizes the student's immediate desire to pass over public safety and the integrity of the licensing process, violating the spirit and letter of the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 1999, and the NZTA Code of Conduct. Encouraging the student to mask the behavior or pretend they're not doing it is equally unethical and dangerous. It promotes dishonesty and fails to address the root cause of the unsafe driving, which is a dereliction of the instructor's responsibility to impart safe driving skills. Suggesting that it's up to the examiner to catch it, not my problem, demonstrates a severe abdication of professional responsibility. The instructor's role is proactive in ensuring competence, not passively observing and hoping for external correction, which is contrary to the NZTA expectations of qualified driving instructors and the safety objectives of the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 1999. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the core professional responsibility, ensuring road safety and competent driving. 2. Consulting relevant regulations and codes of conduct, understanding legal obligations and ethical standards, e.g., Land Transport Driver Licensing, Rule 1999, NZTA Code of Conduct. 3. Evaluating the student's behavior against these standards, objectively assessing risks and compliance. 4. Communicating clearly and constructively, explaining the implications of unsafe behavior and the path to correction. 5. Upholding professional integrity, refusing to compromise standards for expediency or personal gain. Question 8. Comparative studies suggest that driver instructors often face pressure to recommend learners for licensing tests even when their competency is questionable. In Gisborne, New Zealand, considering the Land Transport Rule, Driving on Land and in Public Places 2007, which approach best reflects professional and ethical conduct when assessing a learner driver's readiness for their restricted license test, particularly when the learner exhibits significant anxiety and has demonstrated inconsistent hazard perception and speed management. Option A. Conduct a thorough assessment against the NZTA official criteria, providing honest feedback, and only recommending the test when the learner demonstrably meets all competency standards. Option B. Encourage the learner to take the test as soon as possible, despite their expressed anxiety and observed driving inconsistencies. To alleviate their stress, Option C. Advise the learner to focus on memorizing specific Gisborne routes and common test scenarios, rather than developing broader defensive driving skills. Option D. Recommend the learner for the test immediately, focusing their practice on specific routes likely to be used in Gisborne tests to boost their confidence. Correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough assessment against the NZTA official criteria, providing honest feedback, and only recommending the test when the learner demonstrably meets all competency standards. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driver instructor in Gisborne, New Zealand, who is tasked with assessing a learner driver's readiness for their restricted license test. The challenge lies in balancing the instructor's duty to ensure road safety and adherence to the Land Transport Rule, Driving on Land and in Public Places 2007, NZTA, with the learner's desire to pass the test. The instructor must make an objective assessment based on demonstrated competency, not personal feelings or external pressures. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the instructor meticulously observing the learner's performance against the official New Zealand Transport Agency, NZTA assessment criteria for the restricted license. This means evaluating their ability to safely and competently execute all required driving tasks, including hazard perception, speed management, lane positioning, and adherence to road rules, particularly in varied Gisborne traffic conditions. The instructor must then provide honest, constructive feedback based solely on this objective assessment, recommending the test only when the learner demonstrably meets all competency standards outlined by the NZTA. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the NZTA mandate to ensure that only safe and competent drivers are licensed, fulfilling the instructor's ethical obligation to public safety and their professional responsibility to uphold the integrity of the licensing process as governed by the Land Transport Rule. Driving on Land and in Public Places 2007. Incorrect approach is analysis. Recommending the learner for the test despite clear evidence of poor hazard perception and inconsistent speed management is professionally unacceptable. This fails to uphold the instructor's duty to public safety and contravenes the spirit and letter of the Land Transport Rule. Driving on Land and in Public Places 2007, which prioritizes competency. It also misrepresents the learner's skill level, potentially leading to dangerous driving situations. Suggesting the learner focus solely on memorizing specific routes known to be used in Gisborne tests, rather than developing broader hazard perception and defensive driving skills, is also professionally unsound. This approach undermines the purpose of the test, which is to assess general driving ability, not rote memorization of specific locations. It also fails to equip the learner with the skills needed to navigate unforeseen situations, a critical failure in adhering to the NZTA safety objectives. Pressuring the learner to take the test immediately, even if they express significant anxiety and lack confidence in their ability to perform certain maneuvers, is detrimental. While acknowledging learner anxiety is important, pushing them into a test they are not ready for, based on external factors like the instructor's schedule or the learner's perceived urgency, compromises the objective assessment required by the NZTA. This prioritizes expediency over competence and safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective assessment against established competency standards. This involves 1. Understanding and internalizing the specific assessment criteria set by the relevant authority, NZTA in this case. 2. Conducting thorough, unbiased observations during practice sessions that simulate test conditions. 3. Providing clear, actionable feedback that identifies areas of strength and weakness. 4. Making a recommendation for the test only when the learner consistently demonstrates mastery of all required skills and knowledge, as defined by the official standards. This framework ensures that decisions are grounded in safety, regulatory compliance, and ethical responsibility. Question 9. The investigation demonstrates that Mr. Henderson has been observed driving erratically in Gisborne, New Zealand, involving sudden lane changes and excessive speed. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the investigating officer to ensure public safety and uphold traffic regulations? Option A. Record the vehicle's registration number and report the behavior for later investigation. Option B. Follow the vehicle for an extended period to gather more evidence before initiating a stop. Option C. Initiate a traffic stop to assess Mr. Henderson's condition and driving capabilities. Option D. Assume the driver is intentionally reckless and prepare for a high-speed pursuit if necessary. The correct answer is C. Initiate a traffic stop to assess Mr. Henderson's condition and driving capabilities. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where a driver, Mr. Henderson, has been observed exhibiting erratic driving behavior, including sudden lane changes and excessive speed, in Gisborne. The situation presents a professional challenge for the investigating officer, as it requires a swift and accurate assessment of the immediate risk posed to public safety, while adhering to the specific traffic laws and enforcement guidelines of Gisborne, New Zealand. The officer must balance the need for intervention with the principles of fair and lawful enforcement. The best approach involves the investigating officer immediately initiating a traffic stop to assess Mr. Henderson's condition and driving capabilities. This is correct because it directly addresses the observed immediate danger to other road users. The Land Transport Act 1998, New Zealand, empowers enforcement officers to stop vehicles when there is reasonable suspicion of an offense or that the driver may be unfit to drive. This proactive measure allows for a direct evaluation of the driver's fitness and the circumstances leading to the observed behavior, which could range from impairment to a medical emergency. This aligns with the ethical imperative to protect public safety. An incorrect approach would be to simply record the vehicle's registration number and report the behavior for later investigation, without immediate intervention. This fails to address the immediate risk posed by the erratic driving. While a report may be necessary, it does not fulfill the officer's duty to prevent harm when it is reasonably preventable. Another incorrect approach would be to follow the vehicle for an extended period to gather more evidence before initiating a stop. This prolongs the period of potential danger to the public and may allow the driver to cause an accident or evade detection, if the behavior is due to a serious issue. A further incorrect approach would be to assume the driver is intentionally reckless without considering other possibilities, such as a medical event. This premature judgment could lead to an inappropriate or escalated response. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes immediate public safety when faced with observed dangerous driving. This involves a rapid assessment of the risk, considering potential causes, and taking the most direct and effective action to mitigate harm, while remaining within legal and ethical boundaries. The principle of duty of care is paramount, requiring proactive intervention to prevent foreseeable harm. Question 10. Assessment of a learner driver's financial preparedness for vehicle ownership in Gisborne requires understanding their ability to estimate weekly fuel expenses. A learner driver in Gisborne estimates they will drive an average of 250 km per week. Their chosen vehicle has a fuel efficiency of 7.5 liters per 100 km, and the current price of fuel in Gisborne is $2.20 per liter. Based on this information, what is the learner driver's estimated weekly fuel cost? Option A, $55.00. Option B, $183.33. Option C, $45.83. Option D, $37.50. The correct answer is C, $45.83. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Gisborne driver training instructor who must accurately assess a learner driver's ability to manage their vehicle's fuel consumption and associated costs. The challenge lies in translating theoretical knowledge of fuel efficiency into practical financial planning, requiring the instructor to apply mathematical principles to a real-world driving context. This demands not only an understanding of the Gisborne road network and typical driving conditions, but also the ability to guide the learner through a realistic cost estimation process, ensuring they grasp the financial implications of their driving habits. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves guiding the learner through a calculation that directly addresses the question of weekly fuel cost based on their stated driving habits and the vehicle's fuel efficiency. This approach is correct because it directly applies the provided data, average weekly distance, fuel efficiency, and fuel price, to a standard formula for calculating cost. Specifically, it involves first determining the total fuel consumed per week by dividing the weekly distance by the fuel efficiency, and then multiplying that by the price per liter. This method is grounded in practical financial literacy and aligns with the ethical responsibility of a driving instructor to prepare learners for the full spectrum of driving responsibilities, including financial management. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to simply estimate a weekly fuel cost without performing any calculations. This fails to demonstrate the learner's understanding of how distance, efficiency, and price interact to determine cost, and it bypasses the core mathematical requirement of the assessment. It is professionally unacceptable as it provides no objective measure of the learner's financial planning capability. Another incorrect approach would be to calculate the total distance driven over a year and then attempt to estimate the annual fuel cost without breaking it down into a weekly figure as requested. This deviates from the specific time frame of the question and introduces unnecessary complexity, potentially confusing the learner and failing to assess their ability to manage weekly budgets. A further incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the vehicle's fuel efficiency rating without considering the actual distance driven or the current fuel price. This demonstrates an incomplete understanding of cost calculation, as fuel efficiency is only one variable in determining overall expenditure. It is professionally deficient because it does not provide a comprehensive assessment of the learner's ability to manage driving-related expenses. Professional reasoning. Professionals in driver training should adopt a systematic approach to assessment. This involves clearly defining the learning objective, in this case, understanding and calculating weekly fuel costs, providing learners with all necessary data, and guiding them through the application of relevant mathematical formulas. The assessment should mirror real-world scenarios to enhance practical learning. When faced with a calculation-based question, instructors must ensure the learner can accurately apply the formula and interpret the results within the specified context. This promotes financial responsibility and a holistic understanding of vehicle ownership. Question 11. The audit findings indicate that the Gisborne Driver Licensing Office has been experiencing a high volume of applications, leading to staff feeling pressured to expedite processing. In one instance, a staff member accepted a driver's verbal assurance of their identity, supported by a brief nod from a colleague who vaguely recognized the applicant as sufficient to proceed with issuing a license, despite the applicant not having the required photographic identification. Considering the regulatory framework governing driver licensing in New Zealand, which of the following actions best reflects professional and compliant practice in this situation? Option A. Issue the license as a gesture of goodwill due to the high application volume and the perceived familiarity of the applicant, and then flag the file for a post-issuance review by a supervisor. Option B. Proceed with issuing the license, documenting the verbal confirmation and colleagues' recognition as a mitigating factor, and inform the applicant that future renewals will require standard identification. Option C. Accept the colleague's recognition as sufficient verification for this instance, and instruct the applicant to bring the correct identification for their next interaction with the office. Option D. Immediately halt the issuance of the license and require the applicant to provide the full range of legally mandated photographic identification as stipulated by the Land Transport Driver Licensing Rule 2017, while also reviewing the office's internal procedures for identity verification to ensure future compliance. Correct answer is D. Immediately halt the issuance of the license and require the applicant to provide the full range of legally mandated photographic identification as stipulated by the Land Transport Driver Licensing Rule 2017, while also reviewing the office's internal procedures for identity verification to ensure future compliance. Explanation: the audit findings indicate a potential breakdown in communication and adherence to established procedures within the Gisborne Driver Licensing Office. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for efficient service delivery with the absolute imperative of upholding the integrity of the licensing process and ensuring public safety. Misinterpreting or circumventing established protocols, even with good intentions, can lead to significant regulatory breaches and compromise the public's trust in the licensing authority. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the Gisborne Driver Licensing Office's internal procedures and the relevant sections of the Land Transport Driver Licensing Rule 2017 and the Land Transport Act 1998, New Zealand. This approach prioritizes understanding the specific requirements for verifying identity and eligibility for a driver's license, as well as the established protocols for handling discrepancies. By consulting these official documents and seeking clarification from the New Zealand Transport Agency, NZTA, if necessary, the office ensures that all actions taken are compliant with the law and regulatory guidelines. This proactive and procedural approach safeguards against errors, maintains the integrity of the licensing system, and protects public safety by ensuring only qualified individuals are licensed. An incorrect approach would be to assume that a verbal confirmation from a known individual is sufficient to bypass the standard documentation requirements for identity verification. This fails to comply with the Land Transport Driver Licensing Rule 2017, which mandates specific forms of identification and verification processes to prevent fraudulent applications and ensure the accuracy of licensing records. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with issuing a license based on a driver's assertion of having previously held a license, without verifying this information through official channels. This directly contravenes the principles of due diligence and accurate record keeping, potentially leading to individuals holding licenses they are not legally entitled to. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed over accuracy by overlooking minor discrepancies in documentation, without a clear policy or authorization to do so, risks compromising the integrity of the licensing system and could have serious implications for public safety. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the governing legislation and regulations. When faced with uncertainty or a deviation from standard procedure, the first step should always be to consult the relevant rules and guidelines. If ambiguity persists, seeking clarification from the governing regulatory body, in this case, the NZTA, is essential. This ensures that decisions are not based on assumptions or personal interpretations, but on established legal and regulatory requirements. Prioritizing procedural correctness and thorough verification, even if it appears to slow down the process, is paramount to maintaining public trust and ensuring the safety of road users. Question 12. Regulatory review indicates that an applicant for a Gisborne District Council driver's license has a past conviction for a minor traffic offense that occurred several years ago. The applicant is concerned this conviction might affect their application and is considering how to address it. Which approach best upholds the integrity of the Gisborne District Council's licensing process and demonstrates professional responsibility? Option A. Fully and truthfully disclose the past conviction to the Gisborne District Council as part of the license application. Option B. Ask a friend who drives regularly for advice on whether to disclose the conviction. Option C. Omit any mention of the past conviction from the application, assuming it is too old to be relevant. Option D. Briefly mention the conviction but downplay its significance and provide minimal details. The correct answer is A. Fully and truthfully disclose the past conviction to the Gisborne District Council as part of the license application. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driver applying for a Gisborne District Council driver's license. The challenge lies in accurately and honestly disclosing relevant personal information that could impact their eligibility, specifically a past conviction. Failure to do so not only violates the principles of the Gisborne District Council's licensing process, but also carries legal and ethical implications. Careful judgment is required to determine the appropriate course of action when faced with a potentially disqualifying piece of information. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively and truthfully disclosing the past conviction to the Gisborne District Council during the application process. This approach aligns with the fundamental ethical obligation of honesty and transparency in all dealings with regulatory bodies. Specifically, the Gisborne District Council's licensing application forms and accompanying guidance typically require applicants to declare any criminal convictions that may be relevant to their fitness to hold a license. By disclosing the conviction, the applicant demonstrates integrity and allows the council to make an informed decision based on all available facts, as per the principles of good governance and fair assessment inherent in local council regulations. This proactive disclosure respects the council's authority and the integrity of the licensing system. Incorrect approaches analysis. Failing to disclose the conviction, hoping it will not be discovered, is a direct violation of the application's declaration requirements. This constitutes a misrepresentation of facts, which can lead to the immediate refusal of the license and potentially further penalties or a ban on future applications. It undermines the trust placed in applicants by the Gisborne District Council and contravenes the ethical duty of candor. Minimizing the seriousness of the conviction or providing vague details, even if the conviction itself is mentioned, is also professionally unacceptable. While technically disclosing, this approach is disingenuous and aims to mislead the council. The council requires accurate and complete information to assess risk and eligibility. Such an approach, if discovered, would be viewed as an attempt to circumvent the regulations and could result in the same consequences as outright non-disclosure. Seeking advice from a friend or family member who is not familiar with the Gisborne District Council's specific licensing laws and procedures is insufficient. While well-intentioned, this advice may not be legally sound or ethically appropriate in the context of a formal application process. Relying on informal advice rather than adhering to the stated requirements of the council demonstrates a lack of professional diligence and a failure to take personal responsibility for the accuracy of the application. Professional reasoning. Professionals in any regulated field, including driving, must prioritize honesty and transparency when interacting with licensing authorities. The decision-making process should involve carefully reading and understanding all application requirements, including declarations of past conduct. When in doubt about what needs to be disclosed, the professional approach is to err on the side of full disclosure and seek clarification directly from the issuing authority if necessary. This upholds personal integrity, respects the regulatory framework, and ensures a fair and informed decision-making process by the Gisborne District Council. Question 13. Consider a scenario where a financial advisor in Gisborne, New Zealand, is approached by a long-term client who is very enthusiastic about investing a significant portion of their savings into a high-risk, unlisted technology company. The client states they have researched the company and are confident it will provide substantial returns, and they are eager to proceed immediately. The advisor has a personal acquaintance who is a director of this company. What is the most appropriate course of action for the advisor, adhering to the Financial Markets Conduct Act 2013? Option A. recommend that the client seek independent legal advice before proceeding with the investment, as it involves an unlisted company. Option B. Advise the client to invest only a small, speculative portion of their savings, as the company is unlisted and therefore inherently risky. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive assessment of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, investment objectives, and understanding of investment risks, and then determine if the proposed investment is suitable and in the client's best interest, providing full disclosure of all relevant risks and benefits. Option D. Proceed with the investment as requested by the client, given their enthusiasm and stated confidence in the company's potential, and the advisor's personal connection to a director. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive assessment of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, investment objectives, and understanding of investment risks, and then determine if the proposed investment is suitable and in the client's best interest, providing full disclosure of all relevant risks and benefits. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves balancing the immediate needs of a customer with the regulatory obligations of a financial advisor. The advisor must act in the client's best interest while adhering to the specific disclosure and suitability requirements mandated by the Financial Markets Conduct Act 2013, FMC Act, in New Zealand. Misinterpreting or disregarding these obligations could lead to significant regulatory breaches, reputational damage, and harm to the client. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and investment objectives before recommending any product. This aligns with the core principles of the FMC Act, particularly the duty to provide regulated financial advice that is suitable for the client. The advisor must gather comprehensive information about the client's existing investments, income, expenses, and their understanding of investment risks. Only after this detailed assessment can they determine if the proposed investment in a high-risk, unlisted company is appropriate and in the client's best interest, and then provide clear, balanced disclosure of all relevant risks and benefits. Incorrect approaches analysis. Recommending the investment without a full client assessment fails to meet the suitability obligations under the FMC Act. It prioritizes the client's stated desire over a professional, regulated assessment of their actual needs and capacity to absorb risk, potentially exposing them to unacceptable losses. Suggesting the client seek independent legal advice before proceeding, while generally good practice in some contexts, bypasses the advisor's primary regulatory duty to assess suitability and provide advice based on the client's personal circumstances. The advisor cannot abdicate their responsibility to conduct their own due diligence regarding the appropriateness of the investment for this specific client. Proceeding with the investment solely based on the client's expressed enthusiasm and the advisor's personal belief in the company's potential ignores the regulatory requirement for a documented, objective assessment of suitability and risk. Personal conviction or a client's eagerness do not override legal obligations to ensure advice is appropriate and in the client's best interest. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that prioritizes regulatory compliance and client well-being. This involves 1. Understanding and internalizing all relevant legal and ethical obligations, e.g., FMC Act in New Zealand. 2. Gathering all necessary client information to form a complete picture of their financial situation and objectives. 3. Objectively assessing the suitability of any proposed product or strategy against the client's profile and the regulatory requirements. 4. Providing clear, balanced, and comprehensive disclosure of all material risks and benefits. 5. Documenting the entire advice process and the rationale behind recommendations. Question 14. Upon reviewing the requirements for obtaining a driver's license in Gisborne, New Zealand, a learner driver approaches you, a registered driving instructor, and expresses a desire to bypass the mandatory practical driving assessment, suggesting you could simply sign off on their competency to save time and money. How should you, as a professional driving instructor, respond to this request in accordance with New Zealand's land transport rule, driver licensing? Option A. Advise the learner that they could potentially find a friend to pose as the instructor for the assessment to expedite the process. Option B. Inform the learner that the practical driving assessment is a mandatory component of the licensing process and cannot be bypassed, and that they must complete all required training and pass the official assessment. Option C. Offer to waive the practical driving assessment fee and provide a special discount for a guaranteed pass if they agree to your proposed arrangement. Option D. Agree to sign off on the practical driving assessment without the learner actually undertaking it to help them save time and money. The correct answer is B. Inform the learner that the practical driving assessment is a mandatory component of the licensing process and cannot be bypassed, and that they must complete all required training and pass the official assessment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Gisborne driver training instructor who has been approached by a learner driver seeking to bypass a mandatory component of the Gisborne driver licensing process. The instructor must navigate the ethical imperative to uphold the integrity of the licensing system against the learner's desire for expediency and potential personal gain. Failure to adhere to the established regulations could result in severe consequences for both the instructor and the learner, undermining public safety and the credibility of the licensing authority. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves strictly adhering to the New Zealand Land Transport Rule, driver licensing. This rule mandates specific training and assessment requirements for all learner drivers seeking to obtain a driver's license. The instructor must inform the learner that the required practical driving assessment cannot be bypassed, and that they must complete all prescribed training modules and pass the official assessment conducted by a registered testing officer. This approach upholds the regulatory framework, prioritizes public safety by ensuring drivers are adequately trained and assessed, and maintains the instructor's professional integrity and compliance with the New Zealand Transport Agency's NZTA guidelines. Incorrect approaches analysis. Offering to sign off on the practical driving assessment without the learner actually undertaking it constitutes a direct violation of the Land Transport Rule. Driver licensing. This action bypasses a critical safety check designed to ensure drivers possess the necessary skills and knowledge to operate a vehicle safely on Gisborne's roads. It is unethical, illegal, and undermines the entire purpose of the licensing system, potentially leading to dangerous driving and accidents. Suggesting the learner could find a way to get a friend to pose as the instructor for the assessment is equally problematic. This involves facilitating deception and fraud, which is a serious breach of professional conduct and legal statutes. It not only circumvents the regulatory requirements, but also places an unqualified individual in a position of responsibility, posing a significant risk to public safety. Proposing to waive the practical driving assessment fee and provide a special discount for a guaranteed pass is a form of bribery and corruption. This approach attempts to circumvent the established process through financial inducement, which is illegal and unethical. It corrupts the integrity of the licensing system and suggests that qualifications can be bought rather than earned through legitimate means. Professional reasoning. Professionals in driver training must operate within a strict regulatory framework designed for public safety. When faced with requests that deviate from these regulations, the decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the relevant regulations and guidelines, in this case, the Land Transport Rule, driver licensing, and NZTA guidelines. 2. Assessing the request against these regulations to determine compliance. 3. Prioritizing ethical conduct and public safety above all else. 4. Clearly communicating the regulatory requirements and the consequences of non-compliance to the individual making the request. 5. Refusing any request that compromises regulatory integrity or ethical standards. 6. Reporting any attempts to circumvent regulations to the appropriate authorities if necessary. Question 15. When evaluating a client's request for a high-return investment opportunity in Gisborne, New Zealand, what is the most responsible course of action for a financial advisor to take, adhering to the Financial Markets Conduct Act 2013? Option A. Conduct a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and investment objectives to determine if the proposed high-return investment is suitable, and then provide clear, comprehensive disclosure of all risks and potential outcomes. Option B. Recommend the investment without detailing its inherent risks, focusing only on the potential for high returns to satisfy the client's immediate request. Option C. Immediately proceed with the investment as requested by the client, assuming their desire for quick returns indicates a willingness to accept higher risks. Option D. Advise the client to seek advice from another financial professional without conducting any initial assessment of their suitability for the investment. correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and investment objectives to determine if the proposed high-return investment is suitable, and then provide clear, comprehensive disclosure of all risks and potential outcomes. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a customer with the regulatory obligations of a financial advisor. The advisor must act in the client's best interest while adhering to the specific disclosure and suitability requirements mandated by the Financial Markets Conduct Act 2013, FMC Act, in New Zealand. Misinterpreting or overlooking these obligations can lead to significant regulatory breaches, client harm, and reputational damage. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding of the client's financial situation, goals, and risk tolerance before recommending any product. This aligns directly with the FMC Act's requirement for financial advice providers to ensure that advice is suitable for the client. Specifically, the advisor must gather comprehensive information about the client's existing investments, income, expenses, and their capacity to take on risk. This information forms the basis for determining whether a new investment, such as a high-risk, high-return scheme, is appropriate. The advisor must then clearly explain the nature of the investment, its risks, and potential returns in a way the client can understand, fulfilling the disclosure obligations under the FMC Act. Incorrect approaches analysis. Recommending the investment solely based on the client's expressed desire for quick returns without a proper suitability assessment is a significant regulatory failure. This approach ignores the advisor's duty to act in the client's best interest and to provide suitable advice, as mandated by the FMC Act. It prioritizes a potentially fleeting client request over a comprehensive, regulated process. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with the investment without adequately explaining the high risks involved. This violates the disclosure requirements of the FMC Act, which obligates advisors to provide clear, concise, and understandable information about the risks associated with any financial product. Failing to do so leaves the client vulnerable and uninformed. Finally, suggesting the client seek advice from another professional without first conducting the advisor's own due diligence and suitability assessment is also professionally unsound. While referring clients to other specialists can be appropriate in some circumstances, it should not be used as a shortcut to avoid the advisor's fundamental responsibilities under the FMC Act. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that prioritizes client well-being and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Information gathering, systematically collecting all relevant client information. 2. Needs analysis, evaluating the client's financial situation, goals, and risk tolerance against the gathered information. 3. Product suitability, determining if any proposed product aligns with the client's needs and risk profile. 4. Disclosure, clearly and comprehensively explaining the product's features, risks, and benefits. 5. Documentation, maintaining thorough records of all advice provided in client interactions. This framework ensures that advice is not only responsive to client requests, but also compliant with legal and ethical standards. Question 16. The analysis reveals that Mr. Henderson, a resident of Gisborne, is applying to renew his driver's license. He has recently disclosed a new medical condition to his doctor, which he believes may impact his ability to drive safely. As a licensing officer for the Gisborne District Council, what is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with New Zealand's Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 1999 and the Land Transport Act 1998 while upholding public safety? Option A. Advise Mr. Henderson that his license will not be renewed due to the disclosure of a medical condition without further medical assessment. Option B. Proceed with the license renewal as usual, assuming Mr. Henderson's self-assessment of his driving ability is accurate. Option C. Request a detailed medical report from Mr. Henderson's doctor specifically addressing his fitness to drive with his new condition, and review this report to determine if any license conditions are necessary. Option D. Immediately suspend Mr. Henderson's driver's license pending a full investigation into his medical condition. Correct answer is C. Request a detailed medical report from Mr. Henderson's doctor specifically addressing his fitness to drive with his new condition, and review this report to determine if any license conditions are necessary. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario where a driver, Mr. Henderson, is seeking to renew his Gisborne District Council driver's license. He has recently been diagnosed with a medical condition that may affect his driving ability. The challenge lies in balancing Mr. Henderson's desire to maintain his independence and mobility with the paramount responsibility of ensuring public safety on Gisborne's roads. This requires a careful and ethical application of the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 1999, and the Land Transport Act 1998, which govern driver licensing and medical fitness to drive in New Zealand. Professional decision-maker must navigate the legal requirements for medical reporting while upholding ethical obligations to both the individual and the community. The best approach involves a thorough and transparent process that prioritizes safety without being unduly punitive. This means obtaining a comprehensive medical assessment from Mr. Henderson's doctor, specifically addressing the implications of his condition for driving. This assessment should then be reviewed by the appropriate authority within the Gisborne District Council or a designated medical advisor to determine if any conditions or restrictions are necessary for his license. This aligns with the principles of the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 1999, which mandates reporting of medical conditions that may impair driving ability and allows for the imposition of conditions on licenses to mitigate risks. It also reflects the ethical duty to protect the public. An approach that involves immediately revoking Mr. Henderson's license without a proper medical assessment would be ethically and legally unsound. This fails to provide due process and ignores the possibility that his condition might be manageable with appropriate restrictions, as permitted under the Land Transport Act 1998. Similarly, ignoring the medical information provided by Mr. Henderson and proceeding with the license renewal as if no new information exists would be a grave dereliction of duty, directly contravening the safety provisions of the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 1999, and the ethical obligation to ensure all drivers are fit to operate a vehicle. Furthermore, relying solely on Mr. Henderson's self-assessment of his driving ability without independent medical verification bypasses the regulatory framework designed to protect the public and is therefore unacceptable. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the relevant legal and regulatory obligations. This is followed by gathering all necessary information, including independent medical assessments where required. The information is then analyzed against the legal standards for fitness to drive. Finally, a decision is made that is both legally compliant and ethically defensible, with clear communication to the applicant regarding the outcome and any required actions or restrictions. Question 17. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a driving instructor in Gisborne is preparing a longtime friend for their practical driving test. During the final preparation session, the instructor notices several recurring minor errors in their friend's driving that, while not immediately dangerous, could lead to a fail if observed by the examiner. The instructor is aware that the friend is under significant pressure to obtain their license quickly for employment reasons. Considering the Gisborne Driver's Test Syllabus and Land Transport Authority (LTA) regulations, which of the following represents the most appropriate professional conduct for the instructor? Option A. Provide the applicant with specific insights into the examiner's known preferences and the exact test routes that are likely to be used to help them navigate the assessment more successfully. Option B. Conduct the assessment strictly according to the Gisborne Driver's Test Syllabus and LTA regulations, providing an honest evaluation of the applicant's performance without regard to personal relationship or external pressures. Option C. Overlook minor errors during the assessment that are not immediately dangerous, given the applicant's personal circumstances and the instructor's friendship, to increase their chances of passing. Option D. Inform the examiner before the test begins about the applicant's personal situation and the importance of them passing, hoping for a more lenient evaluation. Correct answer is B. Conduct the assessment strictly according to the Gisborne Driver's Test Syllabus and LTA regulations, providing an honest evaluation of the applicant's performance without regard to personal relationship or external pressures. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a client with the strict regulatory requirements of the Gisborne Driver's Test, specifically concerning the accuracy and integrity of the assessment process. A driving instructor must act ethically and in compliance with the Land Transport Authority (LTA) regulations for Gisborne, ensuring that the test accurately reflects the applicant's ability to drive safely and competently, rather than being influenced by external factors. The pressure to pass a client, especially if they are a friend or acquaintance, can create a conflict of interest that demands careful navigation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves strictly adhering to the Gisborne driver's test syllabus and LTA regulations. This means conducting the assessment impartially, focusing solely on the applicant's demonstrated driving skills against the established criteria, and providing an honest evaluation. The LTA's mandate for driver licensing in Gisborne is to ensure public safety by licensing only those individuals who meet the required standards of competence. Any deviation from the syllabus or the introduction of subjective elements not prescribed by the LTA compromises the integrity of the test and the licensing process, potentially endangering other road users. This approach upholds professional ethics by prioritizing public safety and regulatory compliance over personal relationships or perceived client needs. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves allowing personal familiarity to influence the assessment by overlooking minor errors or bending the rules to help a friend pass. This is a direct violation of the LTA's regulations for the Gisborne driver's test, which mandate objective evaluation based on the syllabus. Ethically, it constitutes a breach of professional integrity and a failure to uphold the duty of care to the public. Another incorrect approach is to provide pre-test coaching that specifically targets the examiner's known tendencies or the exact route the test will take, rather than general skill improvement. While some preparation is expected, coaching to exploit specific knowledge of an examiner or route goes beyond the spirit of the LTA syllabus, which aims to assess general driving competence in varied conditions. This undermines the fairness and validity of the Gisborne driver's test. A third incorrect approach is to communicate with the examiner about the applicant's personal circumstances or perceived need to pass before the test begins. This introduces bias into the assessment process, which is designed to be objective. The LTA regulations for Gisborne expect the examiner to assess performance based solely on driving ability, not on external factors or pre-test lobbying. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Clearly understanding and internalizing the specific requirements of the Gisborne driver's test syllabus and all relevant LTA regulations. 2. Recognizing and managing potential conflicts of interest, such as personal relationships with applicants. 3. Maintaining strict objectivity and impartiality during all assessments. 4. Documenting all assessment activities and decisions accurately. 5. Seeking guidance from supervisors or regulatory bodies when faced with ambiguous situations or ethical dilemmas. The ultimate goal is to ensure the safety and integrity of the road transport system. Question 18. Implementation of the Land Transport Rule. Driving Instruction 2007 in Gisborne requires a driver training instructor to assess a student's readiness for their practical driving test. If an instructor believes a student has a strong desire to pass and has shown some improvement, but still struggles with hazard perception in complex Gisborne traffic situations and consistently makes minor errors in lane positioning, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Suggest the student take the test immediately to gain experience, with the understanding that they will likely need to retake it, but this will give them a feel for the testing environment in Gisborne. Option B. Advise the student that they are not yet ready for the practical driving test, clearly explain the specific areas of concern, hazard perception and lane positioning, and provide a structured plan for further practice to address these deficiencies before re-evaluating their readiness. Option C. Focus on the student's positive attitude and willingness to learn, downplaying the significance of their current struggles with hazard perception and lane positioning, and proceed with recommending them for the test to provide them with the experience. Option D. Recommend the student for the practical driving test, encouraging them to do their best and hoping the examiner will be lenient with their minor errors and that they might intuitively improve their hazard perception on the day. The correct answer is B. Advise the student that they are not yet ready for the practical driving test, clearly explain the specific areas of concern, hazard perception and lane positioning, and provide a structured plan for further practice to address these deficiencies before re-evaluating their readiness. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Gisborne driver training instructor due to the inherent conflict between client satisfaction and adherence to the strict requirements of the New Zealand Land Transport Rule. Driving Instruction 2007. The instructor must balance the desire to help a student pass their practical driving test with the absolute necessity of ensuring the student meets all competency standards and legal requirements for safe driving on Gisborne's roads. Failure to do so not only compromises road safety, but also violates regulatory obligations and ethical duties. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the instructor meticulously assessing the student's readiness against the criteria outlined in the Land Transport Rule. Driving Instruction 2007, specifically focusing on the demonstration of safe driving behaviors and hazard perception relevant to Gisborne's local conditions. This includes ensuring the student can independently identify, assess, and respond to risks, operate the vehicle competently in various Gisborne traffic situations, e.g., urban streets, rural roads, roundabouts, and demonstrate a thorough understanding of road rules. The instructor must then communicate clearly and honestly with the student about their performance, providing constructive feedback on areas needing improvement before recommending them for the test. This approach upholds the instructor's duty of care, complies with the regulatory framework, and prioritizes public safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. Recommending the student for the test despite knowing they have not met the required competency standards for safe driving in Gisborne is a direct contravention of the Land Transport Rule. Driving Instruction 2007. This rule mandates that instructors only present students for testing when they are confident the student can drive safely and competently. Pressuring the student to take the test with the hope they might get lucky or that the examiner might overlook minor errors demonstrates a disregard for the student's actual preparedness and the safety of other road users. Similarly, focusing solely on the student's desire to pass without a rigorous evaluation of their driving skills, particularly in Gisborne-specific contexts like navigating local intersections or dealing with variable weather conditions, indicates a failure to uphold professional standards and regulatory requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals in driver instruction must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and public safety above all else. This involves a continuous assessment process, clear communication of expectations and performance feedback, and an unwavering commitment to presenting only competent drivers for assessment. When faced with a situation where a student is eager but not ready, the professional must firmly but supportively explain the reasons for delaying the test, outlining specific areas for further practice and development, and setting clear goals for future readiness. This approach builds trust through honesty and ensures that the instructor's actions align with their professional responsibilities and the spirit of the law. Question 19. To address the challenge of successfully completing the Gisborne practical driving test, which of the following approaches best demonstrates a commitment to safe and legal driving practices as mandated by New Zealand's Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017? Option A. Prioritizing driving at the maximum legal speed limit whenever possible to demonstrate confidence and efficiency. Option B. Relying primarily on prior knowledge of Gisborne's local roads and assuming that this familiarity will be sufficient to meet the test requirements. Option C. Focusing on memorizing specific routes commonly used for driving tests in Gisborne and practicing those routes repeatedly to ensure familiarity. Option D. Demonstrating a comprehensive understanding and application of safe driving principles, including observation, signaling, speed management, and hazard perception, while adhering to all road rules and exhibiting courtesy to other road users, as assessed against the criteria of the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017. Correct answer is D. Demonstrating a comprehensive understanding and application of safe driving principles, including observation, signaling, speed management, and hazard perception, while adhering to all road rules and exhibiting courtesy to other road users, as assessed against the criteria of the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driver in Gisborne, New Zealand, who is preparing for their practical driving test. The challenge lies in understanding and applying the specific rules and expectations of the Gisborne District Council's road rules and the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, which governs driver testing in New Zealand. A driver's ability to demonstrate safe and competent driving, adhering to all legal requirements and demonstrating consideration for other road users is paramount. Misinterpreting or failing to adhere to these rules can lead to test failure and potentially unsafe driving practices on public roads. Careful judgment is required to prioritize safety, legal compliance, and courtesy towards other road users, especially in a local context like Gisborne, where specific road conditions or traffic patterns might exist. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive understanding of the New Zealand Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, specifically focusing on the practical driving test requirements. This includes demonstrating proficiency in all aspects of safe driving, such as observation, signaling, speed management, hazard perception, and adherence to road signs and markings relevant to Gisborne's road network. A driver should actively seek to demonstrate a proactive and defensive driving style, anticipating potential hazards and responding appropriately. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the objectives of the driver licensing regime in New Zealand, which is to ensure that only competent and safe drivers are licensed. The Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017 mandates that candidates must demonstrate a satisfactory level of skill and knowledge to operate a vehicle safely and legally. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to focus solely on passing the test by memorizing specific routes or common test scenarios without a deep understanding of the underlying principles of safe driving. This fails to address the core requirement of the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, which is to assess a driver's ability to operate a vehicle safely in a variety of conditions, not just pre-rehearsed ones. It also neglects the ethical responsibility to be a safe and considerate road user beyond the test environment. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed and efficiency over safety and observation. This directly contravenes the principles of safe driving and the specific requirements of the practical test, which emphasizes controlled speed appropriate to conditions and constant awareness of the surroundings. Such an approach risks failing to observe critical hazards or comply with road rules, leading to immediate failure and posing a danger to oneself and others. A further incorrect approach would be to assume that local knowledge of Gisborne's roads is sufficient without understanding the broader legal framework and testing standards. While familiarity with local roads is beneficial, it does not substitute for a thorough grasp of the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, and the examiner's assessment criteria. This approach could lead to overlooking specific requirements of the test that are not unique to Gisborne, but are standard across New Zealand. Professional reasoning. Professionals preparing for a practical driving test in Gisborne should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding and application of the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017. This involves 1. Thoroughly studying the official driver licensing resources and the practical driving test requirements. 2. Practicing a wide range of driving scenarios, not just specific routes, to develop adaptability and hazard perception. 3. Seeking feedback from qualified instructors who are knowledgeable about the New Zealand driver testing standards. 4. Focusing on demonstrating a safe, courteous, and legally compliant driving style at all times, understanding that the test is a measure of overall competence. 5. Recognizing that the ultimate goal is to become a safe and responsible road user, not just to pass a single test. Question 20. Examination of the data shows that a Gisborne-based driver training instructor, who also holds assessor accreditation for the Gisborne driver's test, has a student scheduled for their practical driving assessment next week. The instructor has provided extensive training to this student over the past 6 months, covering all aspects of the New Zealand Land Transport Rule, Driver Licensing. The instructor is confident the student is well prepared. If the instructor were to conduct the assessment and the student were to fail, the instructor estimates a 15% probability that the student would attribute the failure to the instructor's personal bias, even if none existed. Conversely, if the instructor were to conduct the assessment and the student were to pass, the instructor estimates a 20% probability that the student would feel they received preferential treatment. The instructor's total training hours for this student are 30 hours. If the instructor were to charge $100 per hour for training, what is the total revenue generated from this student's training? Option A, $3,000. Option B, $2,500. Option C, $3,500. Option D, $2,000. The correct answer is A, $3,000. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Gisborne-based driver training instructor who is also a part-time assessor. The challenge lies in balancing the dual roles of instructor and assessor, particularly when a student they have personally trained is scheduled for an assessment. The potential for perceived or actual bias is high, which could undermine the integrity of the Gisborne driver's test process and public trust in the licensing system. Careful judgment is required to ensure fairness and adherence to the New Zealand Land Transport Rule, driver licensing. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves recusing oneself from assessing a student they have instructed. This approach upholds the principle of impartiality and fairness inherent in the Gisborne driver's test. By not assessing their own students, the instructor/assessor avoids any appearance of conflict of interest and ensures that the assessment is conducted objectively, based solely on the applicant's demonstrated driving ability against the required standards outlined in the Land Transport Rule. This aligns with ethical obligations to maintain the integrity of the licensing process and public safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the assessment, believing their knowledge of the student's capabilities will lead to a more accurate evaluation. This fails to acknowledge the inherent bias and the potential for unconscious favoritism, or, conversely, an overcompensation for perceived bias. It directly contravenes the spirit and likely the letter of regulations requiring impartial assessment. Another incorrect approach is to conduct the assessment, but to be overly critical to prove impartiality. This is also professionally unacceptable, as it introduces a different form of bias, an attempt to overcorrect for a perceived conflict. The assessment should be a neutral evaluation, not an exercise in demonstrating objectivity through excessive scrutiny. This approach still compromises the integrity of the Gisborne driver's test by introducing subjective pressures. A further incorrect approach is to delegate the assessment to a colleague without disclosing the prior instructional relationship. While seemingly avoiding direct conflict, this still fails to address the underlying issue of potential influence. The colleague might be subtly influenced by the instructor's prior opinions, or the instructor might feel less removed than they should. Transparency and recusal are the most direct ways to manage this conflict. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should follow a clear decision-making framework. 1. Identify potential conflicts of interest. Recognize when personal relationships or prior involvement could compromise objectivity. 2. Consult relevant regulations and ethical guidelines. Refer to the Land Transport Rule, driver licensing, and any professional codes of conduct. 3. Prioritize integrity and fairness. Understand that the primary duty is to the public and the integrity of the licensing system. 4. Implement clear conflict resolution strategies. In this case, recusal is the most appropriate strategy. 5. Maintain transparency. If necessary, communicate the recusal to relevant parties.